Now we have some more details on the sale of the XFL, including a timeline, how many bidders, and so much more. So with the XFL sale coming to a close, we learn more about how the process started and how it all ended with Alpha Acquico LLC becoming the new owners of the XFL. Alpha Acquico LLC is the entity co-owned by The Rock, Dany Garcia, and RedBird Capital. We learn the timeline based on some recent court filings that came through today. So to begin with, the sale, Alpha Entertainment reached out to Houlihan Lokey, and Mike Mitchell and I have joked that that sounds like a pro wrestler's name. Anyway, to manage the process. They sent out information to 245 different companies, investors, people on their list, basically, to see if there was any interest in acquiring or potentially even working with the XFL. Quote, the debitor officially commenced the marketing process on May 8th, 2020, with Houlihan Lokey contacting over 246 potential bidders representing both financial and strategic buyers, investors. The list of parties contacted by Houlihan included, among others, names suggested by the debitor's management team and the committee. The debitor's objective was to cast a wide net in an effort to attract multiple proposals, either to purchase the acquired assets and or to invest in the debitor's reorganized business through a Chapter 11 plan, close quote. After casting a wide net to find any interested parties, 35 different parties signed NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, basically saying that you can't talk about what you're about to see. What they got in return is they gave them access to the XFL's financials, their data, a whole slew of different kinds of information that they want to present to a potential buyer of the XFL. Quote, the debitor executed confidentiality agreements with 35 parties who subsequently received the CIM, which is the packet of information, and were granted access to a virtual data room containing additional diligence materials pertaining to the debitor's business. So they got a chance to see behind the scenes how the XFL was doing. And clearly, from all intents and purposes, they were doing just fine. It was you-know-what that screwed everything up. So after reviewing all the information presented by Houlihan Lokey, 4 parties submitted an initial indication of interest. What that means is there were 4 parties interested in purchasing the XFL. They didn't present a bid, but they raised their hand and said, hey, out of that 35, 4 of them were like, yo, we are interested in buying the XFL. Let us get something together and we'll submit a bid. From the court documents, quote, notified potential bidders of the June 22nd deadline to submit initial indications of interest. In response to that deadline, 4 interested parties submitted initial indications of interest, close quote. This was on June 22nd. This gave them time to try and put something together and get a bid to purchase the XFL. As the July 30th deadline hit, Alpha Entertainment wound up receiving just 2 formal bids. So they basically had a month to get a bid in place, a formal bid in place. After review of the bids, Alpha Acquico LLC was the one that was a qualified bid. Quote, by the bid deadline on July 30th, 2020, the debitor received 2 bids. After reviewing the bids and consulting with the consolation parties, the bid submitted by Alpha Acquico LLC was deemed to be a qualified bid. Prior to qualifying the bid from Alpha Acquico LLC, the debitor engaged in good faith and arm's length negotiation over the terms of the bid as it was modified from the form purchase agreement that was provided to all bidders through the data room. They basically went back and forth, kind of made some adjustments, and then this became the good bid. The other bid was not qualified, so the bidder decided to essentially back out. That is when Alpha Acquico, i.e. The Rock, Dany Garcia, RedBird Capital, were announced as the new owners of the XFL. So from the court documents, quote, the other bid was determined not to be a qualified bid, and upon discussions with that bidder, following that determination, the bidder elected not to proceed with the bid, close quote. So essentially, there was 4 interested parties, 35 NDAs, 4 interested parties, 2 bids. 1 bid wasn't meet the right muster, and so that left with The Rock and Alpha Acquico as your winners. Now, it's funny when you start to think about all of this goes down, you're kind of like, wow, okay. But this journey, this craziness started for all of us Super XFL fans on March 12th when the league announced that it was shutting down. We all remember that day. But we knew and we thought that the league would come back. They were saying that it would come back and everything was kind of fine. On April 10th, the league suspended operations and laid off most of its employees. That's when we were crushed. Several days later, on April 13th, the XFL declared Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and all hope was lost at that point, except for some of us who realized that there's a difference between Chapter 11 and Chapter 7, the different bankruptcies. This one was, I've reported on this earlier, Apple, GM, are some brand names that you've heard have declared Chapter 11. That means they're not done, like the AAF. By May 8th, Houlihan Lokey was then in the process of looking for a new owner. So April 13th, they declare bankruptcy. Really, probably right after that, they get in touch with Houlihan Lokey. They start to formulate these virtual data sheets and all this stuff to give to potential buyers. Then they reach out and try to get buyers in, and then the rest is history. So this is crazy to go from March shutting down, April declaring bankruptcy, April, May, June, July, August. By the beginning of August, a couple months later, we have a new owner and a completely new direction and new life into the XFL. Remember, while all of this was going on, this country and the world was in lockdown. Most states, including mine that I live in here in Maryland, on March 30th, put stay-at-home orders in place. So to me, the fact that the sale was even to get done is pretty incredible. So some people will poo-poo the fact that, oh, there was only 2 bidders and only one was qualified. The fact that anybody would bid on anything going on when there is a shutdown of the country that we've never seen before, really, in 100 years perhaps. That was a shutdown of the world, but it continued, and there was interest in there, and people bought it. Now, you can't sit there and say, well, if COVID wasn't happening, they would have had more bidders. Yes, that would have been true, but if there was no COVID deal, then there would be no, Vince would still be owning the league. A crazy, crazy thing. But in the end, lots of prayers answered for a lot of not only fans, but media types and potential employees and players, everybody, that The Rock, Dany Garcia, and RedBird Capital become the new owners of the XFL. What a crazy, wild ride. And now we're on to XFL 3.1.